October 1st, 2013. San Francisco Public Library. A young man sits quietly at a computer terminal, typing. To everyone around him, he looks like any other college student. But this man isn't researching for a term paper. He's running the world's largest criminal marketplace. A digital empire worth over $80 million. An empire that's about to crumble in the next 60 seconds. This is Ross Ulbricht, and this is the story of how a physics graduate with libertarian ideals became the kingpin of the dark web, how he built an empire that redefined crime itself, and how one fatal mistake brought it all crashing down. Ross Ulbricht wasn't born a criminal. He was a brilliant student, a physics graduate from Penn State, a libertarian who believed in absolute freedom. He despised government control, drug prohibition, and what he saw as the state's tyranny over individual choice. But Ross had a problem. His ideals were just that, ideals. He wanted to change the world, but how? The idea came to him like a lightning bolt. What if you could create a marketplace, completely anonymous, operating in the shadows, where anything could be bought and sold, not just drugs, weapons, fake documents, stolen credit cards, anything the dark side of humanity desired. And what if you could add Bitcoin's cryptographic secrecy to make it all invisible to the authorities? This wasn't just a business idea. This was revolution, and Ross Ulbricht was about to become its architect. In 2011, Ross launched his creation. He called it Silk Road. Named after the ancient trade route, it promised to be a pathway to forbidden goods. But this wasn't some amateur operation. Ross had studied the failures of previous dark web markets. He knew exactly what he was building. The site operated on Tor, a network that bounces internet traffic through multiple encrypted layers, making users virtually untraceable. Payments were made exclusively in Bitcoin, with sophisticated mixing services that scrambled the digital trail. And Ross implemented something unprecedented, a feedback system. Buyers could rate sellers. Disputes were resolved through arbitration. This wasn't just a criminal marketplace. It was a criminal marketplace with customer service. But Ross understood something crucial about power. He couldn't run this empire as Ross Ulbricht, physics graduate. He needed to become someone else, someone untouchable, someone feared. So he created an alter ego, a digital ghost who would become legend in the dark web underworld. He called himself Dread Pirate Roberts. The name came from the Princess Bride, a character who passed his identity from person to person, becoming immortal through anonymity. But Ross's version was far more sinister. Dread Pirate Roberts wasn't just a username. He was a persona, a digital god who ruled over a criminal empire with absolute authority. And the empire grew fast. Within months, Silk Road was processing thousands of transactions daily. Cocaine from Colombia, heroin from Afghanistan, MDMA from the Netherlands. The site's commission structure was brilliant. Ross took a cut of every transaction, making millions while never touching the drugs himself. He was the ultimate middleman in a business worth hundreds of millions. But running the world's largest criminal marketplace changes a person. The FBI would later discover a detailed diary where Ross had documented his transformation. In one chilling entry, he wrote, "I am creating a year of prosperity and happiness for myself." In another, he coldly calculated profit margins on heroin sale. He wasn't just running a business, he was chronicling his own descent into darkness. The libertarian idealist who wanted to free humanity from government control had become something else entirely, a digital emperor who ruled through fear. But in the digital empire Ross had built, absolute power became absolute poison. As Dread Pirate Roberts, Ross began to cross lines that the physics graduate never would have imagined. When users threatened to expose Silk Road, he didn't just ban them. According to FBI evidence, he began discussing their elimination. Chat logs revealed conversations about contract killings, about removing threats permanently. The Idealist had become the very thing he once opposed, a tyrant who used violence to maintain power. But Ross had made a critical error. He had compartmentalized his life so completely that he forgot the most basic rule of criminal enterprises: never leave a trail. While Dread Pirate Roberts was careful to remain anonymous, Ross Ulbricht was living a double life. He had a girlfriend, Julia Vi, who had no idea about his criminal empire. He maintained social media accounts. He lived a normal life in San Francisco, and that normal life would be his downfall. The FBI had been hunting Silk Road since its inception. They knew someone was running it. They knew millions were being made, but they couldn't identify the man behind Dread Pirate Roberts. Traditional investigative methods were useless against Tor's encryption and Bitcoin's anonymity. They needed a different approach. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a misconfigured server. In the early days of Silk Road, Ross had made a technical error that briefly exposed the site's real IP address. It was a mistake that lasted mere minutes, buried in server logs that most people would never think to check. But the FBI wasn't most people. That single IP address led them to a server in Iceland. That server led to more servers. And slowly, methodically, the FBI began to map the digital infrastructure of Ross's empire. They couldn't see through Tor's encryption, but they could see around it. And what they found was a trail that led directly back to San Francisco. By 2013, the FBI knew they were close. They had identified Ross Ulbricht as their primary suspect. They had been watching him for months, but they needed one thing: evidence. They needed to catch Dread Pirate Roberts in the act of being Ross Ulbricht. October 1st, 2013. The trap was set. Ross walked into the San Francisco Public Library, completely unaware that his every move was being watched. FBI agents had positioned themselves throughout the building. They knew his routine. They knew he would log into Silk Road to handle administrative tasks, and they knew that once he did, they would have their evidence. Ross sat down at his usual computer terminal. He logged into Tor. He accessed Silk Road's administrative panel. For a few minutes, he was both Ross Ulbricht and Dread Pirate Roberts simultaneously. And that was exactly what the FBI had been waiting for. But they faced a critical problem. If Ross realized he was being watched, if he closed his laptop, if he had time to encrypt his files, years of evidence could disappear forever. They needed to catch him completely off guard. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Two agents would stage a loud argument nearby, causing Ross to look up from his screen. In that moment of distraction, another agent would move in and secure the laptop before Ross could react. At exactly 3:15 p.m., the operation began. The argument started. Ross looked up, confused by the commotion. And in that split second, FBI agent Brooke Donahue moved in. She grabbed the laptop before Ross could even process what was happening. On the screen, clear as day, was the Silk Road administrative panel. Ross Ulbricht was logged in as Dread Pirate Roberts. The empire had fallen. The evidence found on Ross's laptop was devastating. Not just administrative access to Silk Road, but detailed records of every transaction, every conversation, every decision made as Dread Pirate Roberts. The FBI had captured the entire digital empire in a single moment. Ross was charged with drug trafficking, computer hacking, and money laundering. But the most serious charge was continuing criminal enterprise, the same charge typically reserved for mafia bosses. The government wasn't just prosecuting a drug dealer. They were prosecuting the architect of a new kind of organized crime. The trial revealed the full scope of Ross's transformation. Evidence showed that Silk Road had facilitated over 1.2 million transactions, generating over $600 million in revenue. Ross had personally made over $80 million. But the money wasn't the most damning evidence. The prosecution presented chat logs showing Ross's discussions about eliminating threats to his empire. While he was never charged with murder, the evidence painted a picture of a man who had traveled far from his libertarian ideals. The physics graduate who wanted to free humanity had become a digital dictator willing to use violence to protect his kingdom. In 2015, Ross Ulbricht was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called his crimes terribly destructive to our social fabric. But Ross's supporters saw him differently. To them, he was a political prisoner, punished for challenging the government's monopoly on prohibition. The debate continues today. Silk Road's closure didn't end the dark web drug trade. It just moved it elsewhere. New markets emerged within weeks, many run by people who had learned from Ross's mistakes. The technology he pioneered, the methods he developed, the empire he built, it all lived on. But Ross Ulbricht remains in prison, serving a life sentence for crimes that redefined what it means to be a criminal in the digital age. So here's the question that haunts this case. Was Ross Ulbricht a visionary who challenged unjust laws and paid the ultimate price? Or was he a criminal mastermind whose libertarian ideals were just a cover for greed and power? Was Silk Road a tool of freedom? Or was it simply organized crime for the internet age? The answer might depend on whether you believe the ends can ever justify the means, and whether a man who builds an empire on the suffering of others can ever truly claim to be fighting for freedom. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this investigation compelling, consider subscribing to Dark Suits. We expose the criminal masterminds and corporate conspiracies that shape our world, one case at a time. Hit subscribe and the bell icon. The next investigation drops soon.